Welcome, Ling, to Fully Booked. Thank you so much for joining me today.
And thank you for having me, Megan.
I'm absolutely thrilled. I saw you from afar once. It was in Texas in 2018 when you won the Kirkus Prize for fiction.
Oh, yeah, I remember. Was it at the library? It was this very strange time.
It was a strange time. It was a strange part of the library. And I remember being near to you when it was announced that you won. And you seemed, in a word, surprised.
I was.
What was that night like for you?
I think I felt a little bit disembodied. And I remember I was very happy to have won. But I also I remember afterwards, walking, just like going back to the hotel, and I was wearing really this heavy, because I live in Chicago, so I had this like heavy puffer coat, and it was like 70-degree weather. And also I remember when we were in Texas, they were having some water issues. The water was overflowing, and so we weren't allowed to drink tap water. And so everywhere in the streets, you would see these trash bins just piled up with like water bottles. And and it felt a little apocalyptic, dare I say.
Please do.
But I remember after the ceremony, after I dropped everything off in my hotel, and just walking around Austin like late at night, and it was really nice to be there. But I just the stacks of empty water bottles, and having to buy more water bottles because you couldn't really brush your teeth with it or really do anything with the tap water. Very surreal.
It was. And for me too. And it's so funny because I had not actively remembered the detail of the water bottles, but you said it and it just like came flooding back, like the recognition of the strangeness of it came flooding back to me too.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for reuniting me with that part of that memory. Please go on.
Oh, I was going to say, if sometimes it feels like we're living in the future already.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. So, of course, you won the Kirkus Prize for Severance, which was a novel. It is my understanding that Severance started out as a short story. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think I started out trying to write a short story. It's just a fun apocalyptic thing. I didn't think I would be in it for a novel just because I didn't ever see myself writing an apocalyptic novel. I didn't think I could sustain it and the world building and everything. It just seemed like it was challenging. So I thought, well, a short story is about what I can do. And of course it it became much longer and became a novel eventually.
It's really interesting to me because it's like, okay, this is like a big gooey thought I have that maybe we could revisit when it's more like shaped towards the end of the conversation.
I like gooey.
Oh, okay. So, like, I would say, as your fan, I think that you are really fierce as a fiction writer on like themes of like conformity and iconoclasm or like expectations, to subvert or not subvert. And you make me see as your reader, the choices characters make. They have bodies, they have backgrounds, they are put into boxes. They either break free, but like once you break beyond the bounds of the box, you're kind of in another box, right? You're in the rebel box to a certain extent. Anyway, I see like in my weird brain, all of these boxes, like a transparency, like you used to see in high school, with like the overhead projector, like all of these boxes kind of floating on over each other, and the rules of each one applying or being subverted. And see what I mean? Gooey.
Yeah. I think I know, just going off of that about sort of boxes and compartmentalization. I actually, when I'm writing, I do think a lot about sort of narrative tropes of like the genre. So writing Severance, a lot of it was sort of playing with what was already established in the zombie apocalypse canon.
Yeah.
And trying to figure out what I wanted to keep and what I wanted to subvert of that genre, really. And I think about that actually a lot in all my writing. What am I trying to sort of keep of the genre? What have I seen before? What do I want to kind of cross in some way? I've consumed, ever since I was a kid, I just consumed a lot of books, a lot of movies, a lot of TV shows. And yeah, there's a knowledge of all of that comes in handy.
Right. It's all these points of reference. Now it is escaping me. It might be in the first story, the opening story of this collection, Los Angeles, where the narrator, I think she met her husband on loweredexpectations.com or something like that.
Yeah.
And she's talking about filling out a dating profile. And it's like, my favorite music was Cat Power. My favorite this was that. And like, I put in all the these signals, these reference points that we may meet at to decide, that help us identify one another. Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so I think we're probably going to stay gooey, Ling, if you don't mind.
That sounds good.
Okay. So, but a little sidebar. This is a little more concrete question. So Bliss Montage. Well, okay. Step it back from there. Mm-hmm. First of all, let's do it broad. Could you tell our listeners a little bit about this story collection?
Yeah, this Bliss Montage is a collection of stories that are both realist and fantastical. I often feel like I'm working in the horror genre, or at least on the outskirts of the horror genre. And, that genre is the realm of the psychological. And it was important to me that no matter how outlandish the premise of the story, that they felt emotionally anchored in some way. And that was my approach. I wrote most of these stories. Within the first year of the pandemic. And so it really felt like I wrote them in hibernation in some way. Many of them came from dreams. And, some of these stories existed as sort of scraps or little scenes I had in my files for years, but I couldn't figure out how to work. And then I just kind of within, 2020, was able to flesh them out and put them together. Some of these stories, I just needed like the critical distance of time to be able to understand how to write them.
Your editor is Jenna Johnson, right?
Yes, that's correct.
One of the best in my estimation. What's your working relationship with Jenna like? How does she help tease out the best?
I like that Jenna's really open to anything, and she's kind of unfazed if, if I give her a story about a pregnant woman and there's a fetal arm coming out of her. And she tends to be unfazed. I think she's a very intuitive editor. I tend to keep things close to me until I feel like the draft is at a point where it's close to being done. Maybe it's like at 75%, 80%. And I just want to step away from it. And a lot has been sort of already done to my satisfaction, but I know the project itself isn't fully there yet. That's around the time when I like to show Jenna something. And she gives me good feedback. I feel like I also like hanging out with her, but I'm always a little bit weary because I feel like I really enjoy my spending time with her, but I also feel like, should I be friends with my editor because will she then give me too many compliments? Because I want the tough critique.
Yeah.
I want the just raw honesty from a reader.
Yeah.
And from my editor. So, yeah, anyways, that's our relationship.
I'm thrilled to know that. That is very interesting to me. Occupational hazard, you might actually develop, a kind of relationship that pushes you out of that pocket where you want to be, where you're going to get the brave critique. Because when as a reader, I feel like you are a brave writer. I mean, there's a fearlessness on display. Some of these are just so sharp. I have one son and one daughter, one gangbangingly after the other. Hello. With each and every passing year, the back wing shrinks and shrivels up, an old man's balls gradually retracting into his body. Those are 2 lines from that first story I mentioned, Los Angeles. And both of those, I was just like, I don't even know if I wrote anything substantive in the margins. I think I just put a big purple pen slash, yes. I'm so happy to see these sentences.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. I have to say, I didn't really plan on being a fiction writer, or I always wanted to write fiction. And I always did write fiction sort of secretly and sort of little dribs and drabs here and there. But it wasn't until I was 30 that I went and did my MFA to complete the novel Severance. But there's a sense, at least to me, that I wasn't supposed to. This is something that I wasn't really supposed to do. So therefore, right. I don't really have that much to lose in some way. This was it was an unplanned and sort of second stage of my life in some way. And I'm sure maybe to some listeners, it's a little bit ridiculous because 30 is also still young. But to me, I thought, it just felt like being a fiction writer was something that I couldn't really let myself be. But then because I, wasn't really having much of a career, I just thought, well, I have nothing to lose and I'll write fiction. And I wonder if sometimes if that sort of fearlessness, that you mentioned has something to do with, well, I don't really have that much to lose. But I hope I don't lose that sense of risk taking. As there was a lot of attention given to Severance, and I think, especially there was a second wave of attention to Severance at the start of the pandemic, and I think that was around the time I was writing Bliss Montage, and between the lockdowns and that second wave of attention, I think it drove me a little bit further inward. And so I did feel like I was writing these stories in hibernation in some way.
I identify with what you said. Who the hell am I to be talking to you, right? By what rights am I an interviewer of authors on this podcast, on this microphone, So I kind of hope that I will continue to take some risks too. And I think that was one of the pleasures of my 30s, was really just dipping a toe in the water of that, because I had a lot of ideas about who and what I was supposed to be. Didn't really work out for me. So since we dug into Los Angeles a little bit, let's scratch at the dirt a little bit more together. This is one of many of the stories in the collection that's told in the first person. I'm interested in, regarding perspective, what are your particular concerns when you're writing in first person? What does it take to pull it off by your estimation?
I love writing in first person.
Yeah.
You know what? I'm not sure. First person seems a little bit more natural to me. Part of this is because I've been journaling since I was in 3rd grade. And there's something, and I don't want people to mistake my fiction and say oh, this is her journaling voice. It's not, but I'm in that mode. I'm very comfortable. I think in part because I've been journaling every couple of days since almost all of my life.
Yeah.
And so I guess you kind of develop a ear for it. You understand when something sounds maybe inauthentic or tinny. And I am concerned with how the first person voice is supposed to move, like during times of duress, during times of like glee. I rework those sentences sort of endlessly, trying to get them to the point where the voice sounds right. And I'm not sure, I wish I had something more instructive to say other than much of it is trial and error and placing yourself in the head of the character and thinking and trying to figure out what are the details they would notice the most. Something that kind of takes me out of, certain stories is when the first person character sort of, it's a, moment of tension, and then the first person character just starts going into descriptions of what the room looks like or something. And I don't know, you just have to be very much on the ground level with your characters.
This is so good and interesting and fun and funny to me that this is kind of like a piece of pizza that was eaten backwards, crust first. Because I have to ask you now, like, Los Angeles, what is the story about? Who's speaking? What's it about? We've been talking about it, but I didn't do my job.
Yeah, well, my point of entry into a lot of my stories tend to be fantasy. So sort of some kind of wish fulfillment. So I'll tell you what inspired it. It's not fully in the story, but I think it also kind of is. I was thinking, there was a time in my life where I was dating a bunch of like creative types. And I think part of the reason I was, musicians and other writers and so forth, I think I was drawn to dating them because I was trying to figure out how they made it work. Like, how do you sustain your life as like a drummer, your creative life as a drummer, but also like pay the bills? What I realized is nobody makes it work. Like, nobody is able to make it work. And so I guess part of I was thinking, well, what if there's like an arts colony? And I think this was a dream actually that came to me. Like, what if there's an arts colony, but it's like, but I'm married. In the dream, I was this wife who was married to like some rich guy. And then I was able to finance all of these ex-boyfriends, like artistic projects. And so it was like, kind of like, I don't know, like a wife artist colony situation. And it was set in LA, and we could like do our art, but then also like, eat well and like shop at Barney's back when Barney's still existed.
Right.
Another casualty of the pandemic. But so that's where I started is, and that's not fully in there. The artist part isn't quite in there. It ended up being a story about a woman living with her ex-boyfriends, and her husband in their mansion. And I didn't quite understand. It took me a while to understand why she was living with her exes. And I think ultimately the past comes back to sort of haunt her in some way, or like a suppressed part of her past comes to haunt her. And there's sort of this, the story kind of moves towards this spurt of anger that comes out, and she's actually a very angry person. And that was a surprise to me. I didn't know this was a story that was going to sort of go towards sort of this spurt of anger, and about this, basically this abusive ex in her past. And Los Angeles, it's one of two stories. The other is Yeti Lovemaking that I had written and finished like before 2020. But I started writing, there was something about the story Los Angeles that drew me back. And so I started writing this story called Oranges, which is the second story in the collection. And I see the two as this pairing. Oranges is also about an abusive ex. But one story is maybe a fantastical take, and the other story is more of a realist, sort of a more rooted in realism. And I also saw Oranges as, in a way, a kind of psychic continuation of Los Angeles, in which she follows her ex back to his home. So I guess, I don't know if I answered that question of what is a story about. I guess reckoning with abuse in the past in some way. Yeah.
I'm surely delighted by the answer. Whether or not we've gotten it right. Like, is there a correct? I don't know. But thank you for that. And thank you for your generosity with me on that topic. I think this is probably the point in the program where it is 15 minutes overdue to ask the question, what is a Bliss montage?
Oh, yeah. A Bliss montage, it's a term in film studies. I think it's coined by the scholar Janine Basinger, and it refers to sort of this edited sequence that shows the character going on sort of a joy spree. So I guess maybe a simple example of that would be to take a movie that I watched a lot as a kid, Home Alone 2, Lost in New York.
Yes.
When Kevin McAllister ends up at an airport in New York, and he realizes that he's alone in the wrong city, but he also realizes he's in New York. That's followed by this sort of edited sequence of him just kind of blissing out around the city, like going to the top of the Empire State Building or going to Chinatown and buying firecrackers. And it's set to this like music, this very this sort of fun music. It's a pleasure sequence, basically. I was just inspired by that idea, and because I feel that, you know, what compels me into any story is that sort of fantasy, is the sort of pleasure element, at least at first. And so I felt like it just seemed like it was the right title to me.
Is it bliss to you to write, like the actual process of it?
In spurts and in moments it is. The rest of the time it's just kind of feels kind of like drudgery. And, you know, and my preferred method of writing is like going for 6 hours, with breaks, of course, but like just kind of wallowing in the story for like 6 hours a day, 8 hours if I can pull it off. And, you know, most of that doesn't feel great. Honestly, it really does not feel good. But there might be a moment or two where you're just like, yeah, I think I know what the story's about. And I did. Maybe part of the reason it feels bad is because I never know where these stories are going. I don't plan out my stories. I just kind of open it up and kind of explore the world that I'm making. I just never know what it is, where the stories are going to go. It's more that I'm trying to follow an emotion or a feeling, and I have this maybe confidence that whatever this emotion or feeling that I'm following, it's going to lead me somewhere. It's going to drive the story somewhere. Even though, you know, I feel pretty blind, most of the time in the moment, until I at least get some kind of cognizant shape in the early drafts, I can then kind of understand what it's about. I feel that way about Tomorrow, especially. It just was a very odd premise. And I feel that way about Returning. It was a very odd premise as well. I didn't necessarily know what they were about, but there was a sort of a mood, sort of a vibe that I was trying to capture.
Oh, I have 1,000 more questions for you and very few minutes. So I will just ask my most hospitable, tried and true, trusty, musty, old finishing question, which is, Ling, is there anything else you'd like our listeners to know about Bliss Montage or any other stray thought floating around at the end of our conversation today?
I don't know. I don't think so. I just hope you guys read the book and your listeners read the book and hopefully like it or hate it. I like extreme reactions.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think they're going to like it, Ling.
Okay. Thank you.
I did. I'm thrilled. I'm now in danger of, pricing myself out of ever being any sort of, editorial figure in your life because I have too many compliments for you. I think this collection is fantastic, and I am very excited for our listeners to pick it up. Bliss Montage by Ling Ma. Ling, thank you so much for joining me today on Fully Booked.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Megan.